pen or pencil?
The setting aside the strong technique that the film had, but you mentioned that the violence was the reflection of America. But if you look at the 20th and 21st century movies that have had unbelievable violence in them and normalizing violence, don't you think that movies also have contributed in this vicious cycle that many young think that it's easier to kill or from far, movies or games and things like that have some contribution in that violence in the U.S.?
That is an argument, but I would say this reflects it. I would say most movies reflect. For example, Boys in the Hood, that definitely reflects some kind of gang violence that happened in the States. That's just the way it is. They're just showing what's happening. He's showing it in a ridiculous fashion, over-the-top fashion. But I believe that, you have the case, for example, in Basketball Diaries where Leonardo DiCaprio walks down the hallway with his friend in the jacket and shoots a bunch of people, and that could have been Bowling for Columbine, but those kids could have done it anyway. Guns are rampant in the States. There are guns for boys and girls in the States. If you want a gun for your 5-year-old kid, you could go to Walmart and buy a blue gun for your boy and a pink one for a girl. That country is violent. It was born on violence, right? They killed everybody. And they don't know how to deal with it. And I think violent movies, now not all of them, of course, some of them are just being violent for the sake of violence. But I think this movie is just, I believe, I really do, a lot of his movies are just a reflection on what's happening in the world. Your argument is very valid too. I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. Amir.
Yeah, I have two questions. First of all, you talked about the fact that we can call this movie postmodern, and you argue that this happens because of the structure of plot.
That's
that,
one of the
example,
reasons,
the prologue or prelude, everything is somehow in different order. But we had this even before in the cinema.
Oh, I'm sure.
And the filmmakers play with this. I don't believe that we can call it because of the fact that, for example, we change the position of structures of plot. We cannot call it because of that postmodern. I think the fact that, for example, he refers to pastiche might be more valid. I'm just curious, when you talk about, for example, it is a type of postmodern cinema, what do you exactly mean? And my second question...
To be honest, I'm not really even sure what postmodern means. I've studied it. I've studied it in university. I studied it with anthropology. I studied it with art. I studied it with philosophy. I don't think it really means anything except for being extremely different from everything else. And you're right, there were movies that were at a sequence like that. But in 1994, nothing like that was happening. Like Cash said, this movie came out and it blew the entire cinematic world of the States away. And after that, everybody stole from Pulp Fiction. Everybody. Memento. Have you ever seen the movie Memento?
Yeah.
Where he tattoos his body? That's all out of sequence too. It came after Pulp Fiction. You know what I mean? So their argument, the argument that I read, was that one of the reasons why it's postmodern is because of the way it's structured, because of the way it's actually set up.
Okay. And my second question, you talked, for example, about some scene. For example, you talked about the dance scene.
Yeah, these are just a couple.
Yeah, the dance scene, for example, you refer to 8.5 Bellini. But for example, when I see that scene, I also think about that. For example, John Travolta. John Travolta playing Grace, and Grace was very musical. And I think he plays with the actors and their, for example, what they played before in the cinema. For example, their personification. Samuel L. Jackson, the way we think about Samuel L. Jackson, he plays with it. For example, this stereotype. I'm just curious because you did not bring these aspects in analysis. I'm just wonder if you have anything in mind to say about, for example, how he played with actors or their stereotype in the cinema and how he changed them in this movie?
Well, John Travolta, they didn't want John Travolta. Harvey Weinstein, who was the producer, didn't want anything to do with John Travolta. They said anybody but John Travolta. because they didn't. He was gone, right? He was doing these horrible movies that were like, look who's talking too. So he had disappeared. But Quentin Tarantino really wanted him in there because he wanted to bring him back, see what was going on, see if he could actually bring something to the role. And he actually wrote this role for Jules for Samuel L. Jackson. And Samuel L. Jackson thought he was a shoo-in. He thought he was going to do it for sure. But then the guy who played Paul, you know, the guy who was the bartender in the movie, or the scene where Marcellus Wallace is talking to Bruce Willis and then the two guys come in. Paul was actually auditioned for this role and he was going to get it. But then Samuel L. Jackson came back and said, no, I want it. As far as the stereotype, I think Samuel L. Jackson embraced the stereotype of being the black gangster. I think he reveled in it, to be honest. He liked it a lot. You could see it in the way he performed. And John Travolta had some reservations about doing it, mainly because of the heroin, and we didn't want to be shooting up or anything like that. But to be honest, if you take a look at that scene where he's driving the car, stoned out of his mind, it's a beautiful scene, and once you see that, you're like, nobody else could have been this character except for John Travolta. So, as far as stereotypes go with gangsters, I think they wanted to be that.
Okay. Ali?
I have two questions. Why did they call the movie Pulp Fiction?
Okay.
The other one, what was the message behind that watch? Why did they sacrifice so much to, give the boy that watch? Is there any message behind that?
I didn't read anything about the message behind the watch. I do believe that's one of the first scenes, though, that he wrote for the book, or for the movie, sorry. But I don't know if I didn't come across any actual message about it. It probably just carries the story along, right? But the idea of Pulp Fiction, so pulp magazines were popular in the mid-20th century, and they were famous for their graphic violence and punchy dialogue, they say. So, which they exploited a lot to attract the readership. So the film's content mirrors this kind of idea of pulp, and it's fiction because it's not true.
Okay. Nasim?
I'm just wondering the pieces that you pulled out from the film and the connection that you made with the whole other films. Is there your interpretation, your personal interpretation?
No,
or?
I've read some of these online, right? Some of these, the one that, for example, where she gets stabbed with the needle, that was mine, because I made that connection myself, because I had seen that movie. But the rest of them, no, I actually looked online.
Are they coming from Tarantino himself?
What's that, sorry?
Are they coming from?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, some of them are from interviews, and some of them are from, like, for example, clips. You can watch clips of him talking about Pulp Fiction. He mentions things like that. And have you ever watched an interview with Quentin Tarantino?
Just once.
He's kind of like an idiot savant. Like when he talks, it's just
Yeah,
blah, 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 and it's all this stuff about movies that nobody knows what you're talking about. You're like, this 1914 French movie that I like, blah, 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 with these actors and blah, 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 and you're like, what? I don't even know. What? Just stop talking. So he's interesting that way.
Okay.
He knows a lot.
Last question. Toyos?
Two minor questions. One of them was about the displacement of the stories. What do you think the artistic contribution of that is? I mean, why this happened in the totality of the movie? And the second one is using these weird characters in the story, like the guy in the basement, the really hot, horrific character that was there with that shape, and really didn't have anything added to the story in a way, but for some reason it was there. Do you have any theories that what is the purpose of that special character or others?
I think that was just to redeem Bruce Willis, to be honest. That was just to move along that part of like.
But the two rapists could have done that, like that weirdo that was in the.
Oh, you mean the
box,
Gim?
The Gim, yeah.
I think that was just shock value. I think, to be honest, I mean, there is a lot of shock value in this movie, right? Like I said, Marvin getting shot in the face is shocking, right? And the Gimp is shocking. I think he just likes to shock as well, just for fun. I mean, why not, right? There was a guy whose name is Utah Phillips. Utah Phillips was a folk singer in the States, and I was listening to a story. He was talking about the idea of you got to mess with people, Because if you don't mess with people, they just kind of sink into this corporate, their own lifestyle, and they don't see anything else that's outside. But when you mess with them, you open up a sphere that they don't even know exists. So something like that could have been what Tarantino was trying to say. Just like, hey, did you know that this kind of stuff actually happens in the real world? It might not be your world, but it does happen in the world. Maybe you should open up. You don't necessarily have to be part of that world, but you should open up and at least acknowledge that this exists. What was your first question?
About
This sequence.
Yeah.
I think he just wanted to mess it up. I think he was just kind of bored. You know what I mean? Like Reservoir Dogs was the same. It was kind of all out of order in the sequence and stuff like that. I think that was just. I think he was just tired of the way films were being made at that time, and just said, "Hey, I'm going to mix it up." And to be honest, this mixing up is probably one of the reasons why my wife and I are married. Because my wife is Japanese, and when I was in Japan, I would ask people, because I'm an ESL teacher, I would ask people, what's your favorite movie? And most, if not all the women would say Titanic. And I was like, I can't talk to you anymore. I hate that movie. I've never seen it. I will never watch it. I know the ending. It's stupid. But then I talked to my wife, and I asked her, what's your favorite movie? And she said, Pulp Fiction and Trainspotting. And I was like,
That's my wife.
all right, let's be friends, right?
All right. Let's thank Jay. So from now, we're going to start the discussion.